And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First graphic for today's flying weather segment is flying weather for tomorrow, showing IFR here through areas of the eastern and south central Alaska areas right on down into Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula, VFR Kodiak Island up into Bristol Bay, some IFR here over the southwest mountains there, and then IFR also up along the western Arctic coast. Marginal VFR for the eastern Bering Sea and ahead of another system there for Shimianatu, and some IFR for the southern southeast coast. For the afternoon, we've got IFR now for the northern panhandle, eastward across Yakutat into Cordova, IFR for the western Alaska Range, also up here over the western Arctic coast, North Slope areas, right on down to almost into the DeLong Mountains. Some IFR there on the east side, then a swath of VFR here over the western interior, covering areas from the Kobuk Valley there, even in toward Kotzebue, southward into Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island as well. Another zone of IFR here, or VFR, over the central Bering Sea down to eastern Aleutians, building IFR out here with that next big storm over the western Aleutian chain. And then for the day Saturday morning, we've got some IFR along the Alaska Range here, as well as up into the 40-mile country there, say from Nebezna across Northway there to about Eagle, also up over the eastern Brooks Range. A little bit IFR here, Yakutat in across the northern panhandle, and also over the Yukon Delta zone of IFR. Pretty good conditions. Cook Inlet down to Kodiak Island into Bristol Bay with a fair amount of VFR there. And then a narrowing band of IFR with front pushing in toward Adak. And then for Saturday afternoon, that area of IFR slips on down to the south there, barely getting into Unimak Island, Nikolsky area. Marginal VFR for the Bering Sea. Increasing VFR here over the western interior, south of the Brooks Range, spreading eastward here, even the Copper River Basin showing some pretty good improvement. But marginal VFR areas of the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country to the Yukon Flats, IFR from the Brooks Range, central and eastern Brooks Range to the central and eastern Arctic coast. And the southeast coast, another zone of IFR with the next system pushing into that area. And for the passes tomorrow, Anatuvik and Adigan, marginal VFR. IFR for Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR also for rainy and windy. And then for Isabel, a little bit better, marginal VFR there, and Mentasta also looking kind of marginal tomorrow. Tanita, marginal VFR. Portage, IFR. Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels here, 2,000 feet up along the North Gulf Coast and the northern panhandle there with otherwise 2,000 feet, barely on the chart now here, well south of the Aleutians, but the surface still up north of St. Matthew Island and south of St. Lawrence Island right here, cutting back down just south of Kodiak. And for icing, big storm out west here pushing a pretty good zone of considerable moderate rime icing slowly eastward toward Adak, extending back out toward Shimi and the Komodorsky Islands. Could be some areas of potential icing here in the central interior, either side of the upper Yukon River zone, and also an area of icing here for the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, down across the Panhandle. Looking at the jet stream, we've got a low that has backed or is currently pulling westward to about this position at 33,000 feet tomorrow morning. That'll put 60 knot southeast winds into Prince William Sound, turning southerly at about 50 knots, but increasing to 65 knots for the central North Slope. And westerly jet 135 knots, clipping Dixon Entrance. Northwest winds 125 knots here across the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, with those stronger westerlies staying south of the Aleutians. 9,000 feet here, low pressure, again, western Gulf of Alaska. Southeast winds or east-southeast 30 knots here along the North Gulf Coast. Northwest 30 to as high as 50 knots there along the southwest coast of the Alaska Peninsula. And 35 knots out of the northwest there west of Nunivak Island. And then this big storm out here to the west really bringing some stronger winds in 60 to 80 knots. Strongest winds on the south side of that low center with the 60 to 70 knot winds here in advance of the front. Otherwise, southwest flow, 30 knots in across the North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. And at 3,000 feet, lighter winds at this elevation there for the Panhandle area. Northwest, 45 knots blowing across Kodiak Island with those gusty winds extending up into the southern Kuskokwim Valley and along the western Alaska Range area. Pretty light over the interior all the way up to the Arctic coast. Out west, big storm bringing 70 to 75 knots, 3,000 foot winds into the western Aleutians there. And looking at turbulence, look for severe here from Shimianatu out to the Komodorsky Islands, mostly around that tight low center there. Moderate turbulence spreading eastward to Adak throughout the day. And also with that northwest flow, we're looking at considerable moderate mechanical turbulence here. Cook Inlet along the Alaska Range, northeast Bristol Bay, Kamishak Bay area, the Barren Islands, as well as Kodiak.